We're now recording, so anything that you say will be posted online. They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. This is like the theme of every Jewish holiday. Am I right? That's Passover, that's Hanukkah, that's Purim. They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. Not Yom Kippur. Doesn't work for Yom Kippur. But for most holidays, most Jewish holidays, this works. This is like our theme. This is today the scandalous true story of Hanukkah. This is your content warning. If you don't want to know the truth behind all of those stories that they told you in Sunday school, leave now. You're going to find out the real history, all of the gritty details. You're going to find out things that might surprise you. You might even find things that you don't like that much, but you're going to get the real story. That's my promise to you. The way you feel about Hanukkah and the different stories around Hanukkah might change by the end of this Lunch and Learn. Of course, as usual, during this time of pandemic, our Lunch and Learn is bring your own lunch. So I hope that you enjoy your own lunch. I'm going to have mine after our meeting. I know some of you are here on your lunch break from work, so let's jump right into it. Here's what you probably know about Hanukkah already. It's 8 days long. Okay, that's an easy one. What about it's in December? Okay. But can't it sometimes run into January? Wasn't it in Thanksgiving that one time? Didn't that happen? Okay, so let's just say it's usually somewhere in December. Presents for sure. We all know Hanukkah presents, right? But I'm pretty sure it's not a Jewish Christmas, though. You know that. We light candles, we play dreidel, we injure ourselves trying to make latkes. How many of you have lost a little piece of skin or a fingernail? Latkes are serious business, yeah? This doesn't just magically heal itself. Here's a solution you can try. If you've got a power drill at home, actually, I do not recommend this. But this is a nice way to get those perfectly shredded potatoes. Fast way to peel them too. Okay, what you think you know about Hanukkah, if you're a little bit more educated, and I think just about everybody on this call probably knows a little bit more than just the basics. You probably know, gosh, I really made this small. I can't even read it. Can you read what's on here? I wouldn't worry too much. I'm reading everything that's on the screen. It's a little bit tough. Okay. I'm getting it's a little bit tough. Jerusalem was ruled by the evil Syrian Greek king Antiochus. He made it illegal for people to study and practice Judaism. Rabbis invented dreidel to pretend they were gambling and avoid getting caught while they were studying Torah. This was a way when the Greek soldiers would come, they would cover up all of the Torah that they were studying. They'd start spinning the dreidel, and the soldiers would come in and they would just see, all those rabbis, they're gambling again. Gambling, which is totally allowed, permitted, encouraged even in certain cases in Jewish tradition. We have we missed, although we had a wonderful turnout and a lot of fun for our Hanukkah celebration this year on Saturday evening. Shavua Tov, everybody. I know we missed playing bingo, which is why do we play bingo on Hanukkah? Because that's like dreidel, bingo, that's a great tie-in to the holiday. The Maccabees, led by Judah Maccabee, resisted the powerful Syrian Greeks. The humble Maccabees defeated the large, advanced Greek army with God's help alone. They celebrated by rededicating the temple in Jerusalem, and once they cleaned out the temple, they found oil just enough for one day in the Ner Tamid, the eternal lamp. By a miracle, the oil continued to burn for 8 days and 8 nights. Or that should say, I wrote this wrong. It should say 8 nights and 8 days, right? It continued to burn for 8 nights and 8 days, which was exactly long enough to prepare the new oil for the Ner Tamid. These are all familiar, right? We'll see how these hold up by the end of this class. Everybody has a big celebration. Happy Hanukkah. Everyone's dancing. Hooray. Let's get rid of that right now. There's more to the story. For example, what the heck is Assyrian Greek? And what does that have to do with Israel? Let's start at the very beginning there. We've got this map here. You can see Greece is up here. Syria is way over there. And Israel's down here at the bottom. What is the connection between these different places? Let's zoom out for a minute, and we'll really get a better picture at what's going on here. And we're also going to zoom back in time to when the Greeks first began sending out ships and creating trade routes and conquering peoples all over what at that time was the known world. Not just the Mediterranean, but everything that you see in this map was at one point in time conquered by Alexander the Great. You've heard of that, right? This is about 2,200 years ago. The only problem was this empire that Alexander created was so vast that it became unmanageable, and it broke up into these smaller empires, these smaller kingdoms within the empire, and each one claimed to be the real, quote unquote, Greece. They were the real heir to the empire of Alexander. So you have each of these different empires ruled by a different family. And you've got you can see the red one is the Seleucids. You've got the Ptolemies down here in green. You've got all these little ones up here in what's modern day Greece, the Aegeans and the Athenians and so on and so forth. Each one claiming to be the real Greece. Cyprus was doing its own thing. Here in Antioch, we've got Antiochus IV. All right, it's very nice. You know you've made it. You know, they say, how do you know you've made it? When you've got a city named after you because you live there, that's how you know you've made it. So Antiochus gets to live in Antioch. And of course, down here in Alexandria, who lives there? Ptolemy. Didn't get a city named after him. Named it after Alexander. That's the humor. That's as funny as the jokes are going to get, I promise. It's not going to get any funnier. All right. So down in Alexandria, it's not Alexander, you have Ptolemy of the Ptolemaic kingdom. That's where you get the name. You notice the Seleucid kingdom which is ruled by Antiochus, is sort of centered in what is now Syria, right? Expands well beyond that, but sort of the heart of this kingdom is there in Syria. And of course, the Ptolemies are down here in Egypt. And you might notice something about this map. Where is Israel on this map? The land of Israel is like, where are the Jews? Well, I mean, the Jews are all over. You know, we've been a diaspora people well before the destruction of the temple. There are Jews in Alexandria going back to almost the founding of Alexandria. There have been Jews there a long time. Same with Greece, same with Italy, same with a few other places throughout Persia. There are Jews all over this map. But where are most of the Jews then and now? Right in the middle of these two big empires. Not a great place to be. I can see that there are comments, but my screen is too far away for me to see what they are. You're welcome to unmute and ask any questions. I should be able to hear you, I think. But who was this guy Antiochus IV? Well, we'll start again at the very beginning. He was raised in a very unusual situation. This was a common practice in the ancient world in order to control surrounding empires and to bring factions together. One common practice was to kidnap children. So if you're a competing monarch, I might kidnap your children and raise them in my own house. And you wouldn't want to attack me and kill me because then you don't know what I'm going to do to your kids. It's a little bit brutal, a little bit cynical, but it was effective. That's what happened to Antiochus when he was a child. He was abducted by Rome, although he was the heir to the Seleucid Empire, or one of the heirs to the Seleucid Empire. His father was the emperor of the Seleucid Greek Empire, Antiochus III. No, Antiochus III was his grandfather. I forget. We've got some historians here who will let me know. So he was kidnapped. He was raised in Rome. And so he sort of viewed Rome and Greece interchangeably. They were interchangeable in his mind because he grew up in both. He maybe was a little bit messed up in the head from this unusual upbringing. Can you imagine, being raised by your kidnapper, sort of held hostage in case, your parents got out of line? Well, he seized power after his brother's assassination. His brother became the emperor. He didn't want his brother's son to become emperor. So when his father was defeated by the Romans, this is around 190 BCE, that's when he became the hostage. I already said that. my notes are behind me. My brain's ahead of my notes. So King Seleucus the Fourth, that was his brother, the king before him, did this exchange to get him back, gave back Demetrius and the son of Seleucus, and this was in order to bring peace to the empire, but it didn't really work because after that exchange, there was a war. Seleucus ended up being murdered by Heliodorus, who was considered a usurper, taking over this throne. And then Antiochus, in turn, killed him to get him out of the way. That's how Antiochus first rose to power as the king. It's a little bit of a twisty-turny story. This would be a great HBO drama. Am I right? They should once they're done with The Crown. Where's The Crown? That's not HBO. Once they're done with The Crown, they should do this. Well, that was not enough for Antiochus to ensure his power. His brother was out of the way, but what about his brother's son, who might one day decide that he wanted to be king? Got to get the son out of the way. Unfortunately, he was a baby at that time. Didn't bother Antiochus, killed him anyway. He killed his infant nephew in order to solidify his power. That gave him the legitimacy because there were no other heirs in his family line. He also took his own hostages, by the way, just like he was taken hostage as a child. He took his own hostages from other potential rivals. He believed that he was personally blessed by the gods. He believed he had special powers. He was blessed by the gods. He used Zeus and Jupiter interchangeably because of his upbringing. And everywhere he went, he dedicated temples to either Zeus or Jupiter. Founded new cities, and every new city that he went and established, they built a temple for Zeus or Jupiter. He referred to himself as God Manifest, although his followers called him God Maniac. It sounds better in Greek. God Manifest was Epiphanes. God Maniac is Epiphanes. So you can see it's a very clever pun on his name that people called him. Epiphanes instead of Epiphanies. It's like a tongue twister. People called him God maniac because he clearly had no rules. There was no low he wouldn't stoop to. He wanted to bring Greek ideas and Greek culture to the entire empire. That's what he was all about. He believed that Greek culture was the height of culture in the world, and he may have been onto something there. The Greeks were not doing too bad. They had aqueducts, running water when nobody else had this. They had Greek philosophy. It's still studied today, these great Greek philosophers, because they were so brilliant and so sophisticated. A Greek word, sophist. That's again. These are the jokes. They're not going to get any funnier. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. At Yes, at this point, they were also throughout the Greek Empire. In fact, you can still find aqueducts built by the Greeks at the in the land of Israel that go all the way back to the Greeks. More from the Roman period, but there are still a few remaining structures from the Greek period in Israel. They had Greek architecture. Speaking of architecture, you want to build architecture that's going to last. There are Greek structures that were built 3,000 years ago that are still standing today. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive by any count. If you build something and it's still standing 2,000 years, 3,000 years later, I think you did a good job. As Neil deGrasse Tyson once described it, if your uh, buildings last 3,000 years past the end of your civilization, it might be over engineered. So the Greeks did a good job. They also had many Greek innovations, including this. You know what this is? It's an Archimedes screw. Archimedes, famous Greek inventor. The Archimedes screw is an incredible invention in the ancient world because it has, for the first time, the ability to mechanically, not manually, but mechanically move water uphill. You turn it and you can sort of see the inner workings here, and it moves not very quickly. You know, this is not going to be running your shower, but you can move a large volume of water if you build these large enough, and you can move water uphill. This was something that was unheard of in the ancient world. And imagine how much that changed. You could fill an aquifer from water that was at a lower point. You can get water to people who live above the water table of the spring. There are so many applications of this and so many ways you can irrigate crops. You can bring water to people. You can have all sorts of new types of plumbing because you can move water from a lower place to a higher place. Before this, the only way to do that was with a bucket. Incredible. This is just one example of Greek innovation. So Antiochus wanted to bring the technology, the architecture, the philosophy, the culture to all of his kingdom. He built lots in all of these, next to the temple, just down the street from the temple, down the avenue. What's Greek for avenue? Funny thing happened on the way to the forum. Just down you had the forum and you had the gymnasium, which is where Greek sports occurred. Of course, really, he in the process of doing this, he became very wealthy, which was probably his goal in the first place. He also was very strategic because he made sure that the people around him were wealthy as well. If you're going to be, this is good advice, if you're planning to become a heartless despot, make the people around you who are powerful and influential very wealthy, and they will want to keep you around a little bit longer. Uh, but nevertheless, he viewed every culture that was not Greek as backwards, as primitive, and basically anyone who wouldn't go along with this campaign of replacing all cultures throughout the empire with Greek culture, he would get rid of them and have them replaced. You know, Very, very high turnover in the Antiochus administration. Well, what happened in Jerusalem? What caused the wrath of this despot to be focused on what to him was probably an insignificant little portion of his kingdom, other than the fact that it bordered on, it was on the border with the Ptolemies. That was the significance of Israel in the ancient world, and that in the Hellenistic period. That's where we're talking here. Well, Antiochus replaced Onias III, who was the last Kohen Gadol, with Onias's brother Joshua. Here's Jason rather. No, Jason comes later. He was loyal to the Greeks. Joshua became the high priest and immediately changed his name to Jason. Jerusalem was then transformed into a little version of Antioch, complete with a gymnasium, where Jewish Kohanim often played Greek sports in the nude. That's how the Greeks did it. I told you this was not going to be PG. This is the grown-up version. They even had a process to reverse a circumcision so that the Jewish athletes would appear normal, quote unquote. Don't Google the images unless you're really. You can find them. You can see exactly how it's done. I know as soon as I say they reversed the circumcision, there's always somebody in the class that says, "How did they do that?" You're welcome to find out. I'm not going to describe it. All right. So Antiochus not only started transforming Jerusalem with the help of Jason into a little Greek city. The next thing that happened was without sort of unbidden, this other fella showed up named Menelaus, and he decided maybe I would like to be the high priest. It seems like a pretty sweet gig. You've got the ear of the king, you've got control of the temple, you get to run things on your own. And so he approached Antiochus, excuse me, and said, I can make you even more rich. I know that that's what you really care about. I can get you even more gold, more taxes, if you put me into power. And that's exactly what Antiochus did. Now, he was a Tobiad, which meant that he was not a Kohen. He basically sold the priesthood, sold the high priest position to the highest bidder. This was unheard of in Jewish history, and people were not very happy with Menelaus. How was he able to do that? Well, the first thing he did, got to take out Jason, put him out of power, exiled him. And the second thing is he's got to make good on that promise if he wants to stay in power. Remember, you got to make the people around you rich if you want to stay in power. He did that by looting the temple, including the holy artifacts that were gold, ran off with those to give them as taxes to Antiochus. So he did make good on his promise to make Antiochus even more wealthy, but he did so at a very high cost to the Jewish people. There were riots in the streets following these actions. Well, the timing could not have been worse for Menelaus, because just after this happened, Antiochus was out waging war against the Ptolemies down there in Egypt and trying to expand his empire, and the campaign was not going well. It's around this time that word got back to Jerusalem that Antiochus had been killed. Bye-bye, evil King Antiochus. Well, when there's political instability, all of a sudden the guy who put Menelaus in power is out of the picture. Jason gets this bright idea. I'm going to get my own group of people together and I'm going to take over Jerusalem, and that's exactly what he did. Gathered these followers who were already trying to get rid of Menelaus, got them riled up, and retook what he considered his rightful position. They didn't like Menelaus because he was not a Kohen, and they didn't like him because he had robbed the temple in order to pay off the Greek king. This is the expression I imagine he might have had when he found out that, well, Antiochus was still alive. Oops! Turns out rumors of his death were greatly exaggerated. Antiochus, traveling back through the land of Israel from his defeat in Egypt, came and realized that everything that he had set up in Jerusalem, the priest he had set up in Jerusalem, the leadership he had set up, the tax system had been dismantled, and Jason, who he had gotten rid of, was now back in charge. There had been a big rebellion, and generally, despotic rulers don't take kindly to rebellions. He was furious. When he got back to Jerusalem, he waged a war. He slaughtered thousands of people, reinstated Menelaus, and after he left, he heard that there was a second uprising to try to change things back. He said, that's it. These Jews, you've lost all of your privileges of being Jewish, all of your privileges of self-rule. Menelaus is out. Not only that, we're going to transform your temple into a temple for Zeus. You worship a sky god anyway. Zeus is the god you're going to worship from now on. So out with everything related to Adonai, in with everything related to Zeus. That included offerings like pigs. That was one of the common Greek offerings to Zeus. And there were pigs stored in the temple courtyard. Got rid of Menelaus, as I said, killed. Here's an artist's depiction of the battle which put down this second Jewish rebellion. Wiped out, as I said, thousands of people. It's one of the bloodiest descriptions in ancient history. You can find this. By the way, how do we know all of this? Because it's written down. We have historians. We have Josephus, who writes about this in great detail, and we have the Book of the Maccabees, actually Maccabees 1 and 2, which describe in great detail all of these events. This is recorded at the time, or at least a lot closer to the time than we are now. So we have all of these. This is not speculation. It's written down, and it's generally agreed upon history. Not only that, not only did he transform the temple, he outlawed circumcision. No more circumcision. No more studying Torah. That's where all of these troublesome ideas are coming from in the first place. Wipe that out. No more kosher foods. You can't eat Jewish foods anymore. You've got to eat Greek foods. You've got to use Greek preparation. No more celebrating Shabbat or celebrating Jewish holidays. That was just an excuse for these rebellious Jews to gather together to practice their backwards religion, so that's got to go too. These were the restrictions that he put in place, and now you understand the context of why. Because these were all ways that he believed the Jews were organizing rebellions against him. And he said, no more, you're going to be Greek and you're going to like it. This is around the time that the Maccabees show up. Who were the Maccabees? You know, here's your I call it the Santa Claus version of Hanukkah. You know, you've got the Maccabees, they're up there, they're lighting the menorah. How do the Maccabees have a menorah with 9 branches already when that only was invented after them? I don't know. Clearly, this is not intended to be a historically accurate artistic depiction, right? It's a cartoon, okay. Who were the Maccabees really? The Maccabees were characterized by extremism. Let me explain what I mean by that. The father of the Maccabees was Mattathias. If you use the Ashkenazi pronunciation, that's Matisyahu. Many of you might know of the well-known musician named Matisyahu. Give him a listen sometimes. I think he's pretty good. I would even say I'm a fan. I had a chance to see him live in Israel, and it was amazing. Most of the urban Jews, I should say, those who were living in Jerusalem and a couple of other big cities at that time, really liked this idea of Hellenization, this idea of being more connected with the Greek world, with being more connected with the broader world. And they thought these Greek customs, this Greek philosophy and technology was making their lives better. They said, we like this. We like the gymnasia. We like the education. We like the sports, the naked wrestling. That's what they did. I don't know what else. There's not a nice way to say naked wrestling. That's what they did. The original Olympics were all in the nude. How do you do the pole vault? Okay. They sent a messenger to Mattathias, who was a rural northern Israel, living in the northern hills, a rural priest. They found out that he was still doing the old Jewish practices and sent messengers to him to stop what he was doing, to stop the traditional offerings, and instead begin making offerings to pagan idols to come in line with the mainstream changes that happened. You ever heard the phrase, don't kill the messenger? You've heard of that? Most of the heads are nodding, don't kill the messenger. Mattathias did not ever hear this phrase because that's exactly what he did. They sent a messenger to say, listen, you've got to change what you're doing. You've got to start making offerings to the Greek idols instead of to God. And the first thing he did is he killed the messenger. Not only that, and this was a Jewish messenger, not only that, but he killed all of the people that came with that messenger, the soldiers and the courtiers is not the right word, the entourage that had come. And basically, once, including the king's soldiers, once you kill the king's soldiers, you better run. So first of all, he refused to follow these new orders, got his sons together and as many followers as he could, and fled even deeper into the mountains. There, with his sons, that's the beginning of the successful Jewish uprising, because remember, this is number 3 now, to retake Jerusalem. The revolt was directed as much against these Hellenized Jews, these Jews who believed and supported in the Hellenization, the Greekization, Hellenization of, Hellen just means Greece. The Hellenization of Judaism. All of those Jews who supported that, the Maccabees were as much opposed to them as they were to the Greeks themselves. He said, this is from Maccabees 1, chapter 227, let everyone who is zealous for the law and stands by the covenant follow me. That was his cry, his rallying cry to the people. How did this small band of the Maccabees defeat this powerful army? You saw this huge army. They were fighting major empires. Israel was small potatoes. Jerusalem was small potatoes compared with Cairo, compared with Greece, compared with Persia. So how were they so successful, this rural band fighting in the hills? Well, they used guerrilla warfare. The Maccabees, and if you've ever traveled to Israel, in the north of Israel, especially, throughout Israel, but especially in the north, uh, there are many natural caves and tunnels. The Maccabees used this to their advantage because they knew the terrain better than their attackers. This happened in Vietnam, very famously, that the locals knew and used the terrain much better than the Americans who went in there. I don't know if any of you were in Vietnam or if you have friends who were there, but that's the story of why Vietnam was such a terrible conflict. That's what the Maccabees did. They used their knowledge of the terrain. Maybe even a better example, comparison is the Taliban. Why has the Taliban been so difficult a foe in Afghanistan? Because they use the tunnels, they use the hills, they use their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. And using these tunnels means you could, uh, what the Maccabees would do is they would attack very fast and hard, like a hammer. That's what the word Maccabee means. Do you guys know that? Maccabee means hammer? I see some heads nodding. The Maccabees, the hammers. That's their symbol. Why were they called that? It's not because they were masons. That's the Santa Claus version. They say, oh well, they were simple working folk. No, they were priests. But the way that they attacked was fast and hard, like a hammer coming down. They would use the tunnels, show up in the middle of the enemy camp, kill as many people as they could, and then disappear back into the tunnels before anyone could find them. This was uh, shock forces and shock tactics, as well as tunnel warfare and guerrilla warfare. That's what they used to attack the Greeks. They also formed strategic alliances, especially with Rome. How do we know this? Again, this is all written in the book of Maccabees. You can open up, okay, not our Bible. It didn't make it into our Bible because it's a little bit too late. It was written in Hebrew. You could open up a Christian Bible where it is in many Christian Bibles included, and you can find this book of Maccabees, or these two books of Maccabees rather. The Romans sent them food, arms, and other supplies to keep them supplied as they fought against the Greeks. Why? Because Rome was opposed to Greek. It's that simple. Rome said, wait a minute, there's this Greek empire. If we can cause problems inside their own empire, if we can turn their own people against each other, if we can create division in their own people, then they're going to be a lot easier for us to conquer later. Was Rome right? Rome was right. That's another holiday entirely, though. Judah and Simon Maccabee made deals with Rome, not only Rome, but also Sparta, another Greek faction that believed that they were the true heirs of the empire of Alexander, who were opposed to these Seleucids, who were claiming that they were the heirs of the Alexander Empire. Not only that, but in 167, Partha, that's another one of those, a third different Greek faction, attacked the Seleucid Empire, capturing a major city in modern-day Afghanistan, and Antiochus had to pull all of his forces out of Israel to go and fight them, to fight a bigger, badder enemy. So between those strategic alliances of other empires that were opposed to the Seleucid Empire and other major attacks that were distracting and pulling forces away, divide and conquer, right? Coupled with the use of guerrilla warfare meant that they were able to defeat the Greek army. although Mattathias, the father, was killed in this fighting. Judah, who was the eldest brother, declared himself king and established the Hasmonean dynasty. His brother, Simon, became the high priest. This was unprecedented in Jewish history. You've got Menelaus, who declared himself, or who purchased the priesthood. This is maybe not quite that corrupt, but pretty darn close. It's almost as bad, because you've got one family that controls the crown, they didn't use a crown, the throne, let's say, one family that controls the throne and the temple, which had never happened since the days of Moses and Aaron, where Moses was the political leader, although he was not the king, and Aaron was the head of the priesthood. By the time the monarchy was established, the priesthood was a completely separate entity. We're talking separation of powers, right? You've got the priesthood, you've got, Ezekiel, and then you've got Saul and David, totally separate entities operating with different powers. This separation of powers ensured that there were checks and balances, just like our modern day system. Okay, one check and one balance, right? There are only two sides. So the idea of those being separate was key to the Jewish ethos. It's key to the establishment of the priesthood and the monarchy. But the Maccabees, who at this point we can call them the Hasmoneans, they didn't really care so much about that. Even though it was unprecedented, they said, well, we won the war and we get all the marbles. They instituted an 8-day festival. Why an 8-day festival? Here you can unmute. What's another example of an 8-day festival in Judaism? Raul, go for it. How about Passover? Excellent example. What else? How about Sukkot? You see what I did there? Not only did I know what answers you were going to give, I knew the order you were going to give them in. You see? Your rabbis, your rabbis got power. No. Uh, these are major biblical festivals. The Hasmoneans, in order to legitimize their religious rule, wanted to create a third major festival, a third major 8-day festival that would be comparable to Passover or Sukkot. This at least is one theory about why they instituted this 8-day Hanukkah celebration. One of the answers is that another answer is that they were fighting during Sukkot. That was during the uprising. So they didn't get to celebrate Sukkot as they normally would. And so Hanukkah was a second Sukkot. Although this is a little bit detracted from the fact that Hanukkah really was instituted as a festival a year after the fighting stopped. The next possibility. Sorry, I want to make sure I'm not missing anything important here. There's another possibility of why they wanted to institute an 8-day festival. Well, it just so happens that's exactly how long it takes for the purification ritual to appoint a new high priest. There's a period of purification. It takes 8 days, and it's on the 8th day that you can say, this is now the high priest. So if you make that a big festival and everybody is celebrating Simon becoming the new high priest, then you don't have to worry about his legitimacy, because you say everybody was out here partying. We had the most people partying you've ever seen, crowds and throngs of people. Well, it actually didn't catch on right away. This idea of having the third festival didn't catch on in a major way until hundreds of years later, in fact. Hanukkah in ancient times, throughout the Hasmonean dynasty, was still considered to be a minor holiday. It was, even by the time it reached the rabbis, who really emerged as the leading voice of Judaism in the 1st century CE, this is some 200 or 300 years later, it was still considered at that time a minor festival. Hanukkah it's barely mentioned in the Mishnah. It's downgraded to a minor holiday by the predecessors, who, by the way, also did not canonize. They made a choice not to include the books of Maccabees in the Hebrew Bible. That was a choice that was made. Okay, and by the way, sad to say it, the rabbis added the miracle of the oil. This is never mentioned, not in Maccabees 1, not in Maccabees 2. The miracle of the oil, oh no, Raul and Benny are very troubled. The miracle of the oil is never mentioned until it shows up in the Talmud. In fact, in the Gemara, not even in the Mishnah. Probably the rabbis were uncomfortable with celebrating a military victory for theological reasons, because we don't celebrate violence, but also for practical reasons. If you're being ruled by a major power at this time, at the time of the rabbis, we're now talking about the Romans. See, the Maccabees didn't really think it all the way through. They made this alliance with the Romans so the Romans would defeat the Greeks, but that sort of came back to bite us, didn't it? The Romans were even worse once they took over. And the rabbis didn't want to have a festival celebrating Jewish independence from a powerful empire when there were Romans walking around. So the story of the miraculous oil adding 8 days only shows up in the Talmud. You can read about this in Shabbat 21b. It also happens that this corresponds with the oil making season. If you go to Israel right now, you can, well, first of all, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks because there's a pandemic. But if you were already in Israel, you could go and you could take part in the olive harvest, which is happening right now in the land of Israel. This is when olives are harvested. And so this connection between the oil, between the olive harvest, between the Maccabees, maybe that was the connection that first led to the idea of the miracle. That's what historians and scholars tend to believe. Of course, the traditional Jewish answer, the Orthodox answer that you would probably get in most Orthodox synagogues from most Orthodox rabbis would be, well, they didn't write about the miracle of the oil because it was so obvious. Everybody already knew it and they didn't need to write it down. You can decide for yourself how plausible that explanation is for you. Okay. We all know Nes Gadol Haya Sham from the dreidel, right? A great miracle happened there. You go to Israel, everybody who goes to Israel, even if it's in the middle of June, you got to buy a dreidel because it says Nes Gadol Haya Peo with a pei. A great miracle happened here. Nun Gimel He Shin. I have bad news for you. Dreidel is actually a modern German game. Benny, I warned you at the very beginning. I warned you we were going to get serious here. All right, Nun Gimel He Shin, where does this come from? Have you ever noticed that when you play dreidel, the letters line up very well with the English explanation? Nun, nothing. Gimel, give me. Hey, half. That's not a coincidence. Originally, we have dreidels that are about 200 years old. When I say modern, I'm talking the modern period, the past 400 years or so. Not contemporary, but it's modern. Okay. We're not talking the 20th century. We're still modern in the 18th century. Everything after Napoleon is considered modern. Uh, some people even before that. I don't know the names of the German letters are not so easy for me to pronounce. I've never studied German. Maybe somebody studied German and can tell me how I do. But this is, you've got the N, that's easy. Gai, Ha, and S, which stood for nicht. What does that mean? Nothing. Ganz, which is give, everything. Halb, half, that's where we get the English word half. Nicht and halb are actually where we get the English words. English, which is, we'll talk about the history of English another time. And stell ein, which is to put in. Stell ein, put one in. This is where the letters come from. They were already there. They were already there in German before it was converted to Yiddish, which uses the Hebrew alphabet, and we got the dreidel with Nun, Gimel, He, and Shin from the Yiddish alphabet. If you were writing these words, nicht ganz halb stell ein, if you were writing it in Yiddish, you would use Hebrew letters. That's probably where the Hebrew letters show up on the dreidel, and then, of course, it's only after that that we get Nes Gadol Haya Sham. All right, so here's what you thought you knew about Hanukkah. This is the same slide from the beginning. Jerusalem was ruled by an evil Syrian Greek king Antiochus. What do you think? Now, knowing what you know now, do you think it's true? I would say it's probably still true. Yeah, he's kind of evil. He killed babies. That's generally a pretty good litmus test of evil, I think. He also was very economic minded. He wanted to bring Greek innovation and culture. He wanted to bring civilization to what he viewed as uncivilized parts of the world. There's a little bit more to his story than just being pure evil. But for sure, he was evil. I think we can agree on that. He made it illegal to study Torah and practice Judaism. Out of the blackness of his heart? No, it was specifically targeted towards defeating any chance at a future uprising. But he did actually do that. That is a thing that happened. The reasons for him doing that are what you have a better understanding of now. He wanted to root out religious extremists. He wanted to unify Greek culture. The rabbis invented dreidel to cover up the fact that they were studying Torah. Now you know that never happened. There were no rabbis that covered up the Torah and started playing dreidel. But it is a nice story. It is a nice story. I like it. It's still one of my favorite stories about Hanukkah. The Maccabees, led by the brave Judah Maccabee, resisted the powerful Syrian Greeks. Yes, the Maccabees did that. They were also freedom fighters. They were political actors. They were religious extremists. Anybody who didn't agree with their interpretation of Jewish practice, they waged war against as well. In fact, after they had taken Jerusalem, there was a civil war among those who wanted to continue having a positive relationship with Greece. They recruited help from Rome and from and were lucky enough to have other battles that drew the Greeks away from fighting in Jerusalem. They seized control of the temple and they enforced it with violence. Judah Maccabee defeated, the humble Maccabees defeated the large advanced Syrian Greek army with God's help alone. Well, they also had help from the Romans and the Parthians and the Spartans, right? They celebrated by rededicating the temple in Jerusalem. They did, and they used that to legitimize their control and their own power. Once they had cleaned out the temple, they found just enough oil in the Ner Tamid for one day. Now we know, if that happened, nobody mentioned it for about 250 years. Somehow they've just left that out. They forgot. Forgot to jot that down in the margins. By a miracle, the oil continued to burn for 8 nights and days, which was exactly long enough to prepare new oil for the Ner Tamid. Actually, the 8 days probably comes from the Maccabees' desire to have a festival celebrating them rather than, in addition to the 8-day festivals that celebrate the other times of the year. So here's the big question. Knowing what you know now, were the Maccabees heroes? They did do some good. They defended Judaism. They stood by their beliefs. You can't argue that they didn't stand by their beliefs. They defended the common people. It was mostly the elites, the urban elites, we would say today, but in this time, very literally, the urban elites who favored adopting Greek culture into Judaism. But the people who were out in the countryside, the people who were working in the fields, the people who were growing the food, the people who were the day-to-day Jews, the common people, really didn't support this idea of Hellenization. In that sense, the Maccabees defended them, and they fought against this corruption and greed, although they were not totally clean of any corruption themselves. For sure, all of that stuff with Jason and Menelaus, if that's not corruption at the highest level, I don't know what is. Am I right or am I wrong? They did, factually speaking, overcome more powerful forces. Regardless of how they did it strategically, they succeeded in driving back the Greeks, the most advanced army in the world at the time. They acted strategically and decisively in order to meet their ends. They did clean and repair the temple and restore it to Jewish practice. And they gave their lives in defense of God. We know that Mattathias died in the uprising, the father of Judah and Simon Maccabee and all of the other Maccabees. Perhaps most remarkably, they established Jewish independence for nearly 100 years. From the time of the kingdom of David to the time of the modern state of Israel, this is the only period in the history of Judaism in which Jerusalem and Israel had Jewish independence, was not ruled by an outside power in the entire history in between there. This 100 years, Israel was independent. So what do you think? Were the Maccabees heroes? Knowing what you know now, you still think they're heroes? Benny gives it a thumbs up. He says yes. No. Thumbs up for the information. Raul has mixed feelings. Yeah, they were flawed heroes. They did some good. They didn't always do the good in the right way. And let's face it, you know, nothing in the world is really the Santa Claus version of the world. You know, you start reading about Christopher Columbus and you start reading about Ben Franklin and you start reading about any of your heroes and you get too detailed and you realize, gosh, they're flawed human beings. Yeah, yeah. Sarah. Oh, yeah. There would never have been Jewish rule between the Greeks and the Romans in the land of Israel. And in fact, Judaism as we know it might not exist if their cause had failed, their cause of resisting Hellenization. We might well have ended up like the Hittites or the Perizzites or the Jebusites, these lost nations who their religion is gone, their civilization is gone, their culture is gone because they were swallowed up by the Greeks or they were swallowed up by the Romans or they were swallowed up by the Persians or they were swallowed up by the Arabs. These great conquests of the land that eliminated a lot of other cultures and civilizations did not succeed in eliminating Jews. And partly, this is one example where you can say for sure if they had failed in that mission, what would have happened to the Jewish people? Would we still be a distinct people? David. Yeah, yeah. That was a few hundred years later. At this point, there were Jews in Babylonia, but remember that map of the Greek Empire that even includes Babylonia. There's no more Babylonia at this point. It's all Greece. It's all conquered by Alexander, and then this is just after that period of the giant unified Greece where Alexander conquered the known world, and it ended up sort of divided into these pieces, these smaller kingdoms that began fighting with one another. We wouldn't have Sufganiyot. That's the real heroic. Yes. As far as I know, yeah. Yes. Of absolutely. Yeah, they didn't for sure they didn't potatoes are a new world food. They come from the Americas. Actually, I don't know if it's North America or South America. Oh, there you go. Well, I'll tell you, all of this talk of delicious fried foods cooked in oil in honor of the miracle of the oil. What is the importance of the miracle of the oil? There's an important lesson there. You don't have to throw that out the window just because maybe it didn't happen. The message of the miracle of the oil is still true. The message is we don't celebrate violence. We don't celebrate military victories. That's the message of the miracle of the oil, that we celebrate miracles, we celebrate positivity, we celebrate light. That even when that came through a dark time, it's the light that we celebrate, not the darkness. That's the miracle that we celebrate. So don't toss it out the window, don't push it aside just because you're wondering maybe it didn't really happen or maybe it didn't happen the way that we were told as kids it happened. The message is still every bit as true. Well, possibly. That's one of the mysteries of Mashiach. One of the things that we won't know until it happens, but we know that all of uh, um, our fasts, all of our days of mourning will become days of celebration. Yom Kippur is going to be a big feast. Uh, the fast of Esther instead is going to be a big feast. The fast of Gedalia, the fast of Tu B'Shvat, all of those are going to be big celebrations because we will have no more reason to feel sad about anything in the world because we will have finally reached this world's perfection. We know across Judaism, we don't all agree on what the Mashiach will look like, but we do agree that it is our work today that makes this earth fertile ground for the Mashiach to arise, that we have to do the work to make this world ready, to make this world better, to make this world a place where that kind of paradise could one day be possible. Between that, that's my final thought, and all of this talk of delicious fried foods, I'm getting hungry. I'm going to go have my lunch. If you've already eaten, B'te'avon, I hope you enjoyed it. If you're about to eat B'te'avon, say a blessing and enjoy. Have something, nice fried food for Hanukkah. We'll see you later. Shavua Tov. Have a great week. Have a happy Hanukkah, and we'll see you for Shabbat. Bye.